Chapter 6. The Carew Murder. Nearly a year later, in October 1880, there was a terrible crime in a London street. Everyone in London was shocked when they heard about it. A young woman servant saw it happen. She lived alone in a house not far from the river. At about 11 o'clock on the night of the crime, she went up to her room. She sat on a chair near the window and looked out at the moonlit streets. She was a romantic young woman, and she began to think about love. After a time, she noticed an old man with white hair coming along the narrow street below her window. Then she saw another, very small man going along the street the opposite way. This man carried a heavy stick in his hand. When the two men were quite close, the old man stopped. He seemed to ask the small man a polite question. The girl saw him pointing. She thought that he was asking the way. The moon shone on the old man's kind face as he spoke. The girl looked at the other man. To her surprise, she knew his face. He was a man, Mr. Hyde, who once visited her employer. She remembered feeling a strong dislike for him at that time. Suddenly, this Mr. Hyde became crazy with anger. He waved his stick and started shouting. The old man looked very surprised. He took a step back. And then Mr. Hyde really went mad. Like a wild animal, as the girl described it later. He hit the old man over the head with his stick and knocked him to the ground. Then he jumped on the old man's body and hit him again and again with the heavy stick. He did not stop until the old man was dead. This terrible thing was too much for the girl. She fell to the floor, her eyes closed, and for some time she knew nothing. It was 2 o'clock before the girl opened her eyes again. When she remembered the murder, she immediately called the police. The murderer was not there, of course, but the murdered man was still on the ground in the middle of the narrow street. The heavy stick was broken, and one half of it lay near the body. The police looked in the murdered man's pockets and found some money and a gold watch. There was also a letter, ready to post. The envelope had Mr. Utterson's name and address on it. A police inspector brought this letter to the lawyer just before 9 o'clock in the morning. He told Mr. Utterson about the crime. Mr. Utterson listened carefully. Then he said, "This is a very serious matter, but I don't want to say anything until I see the body." "I'll take you now," said the police inspector. The body was at the police station. When Utterson saw it, he said, "Yes, I know him. This is the body of Sir Danvers Carew." "Really, sir?" said the police inspector. "He's a very famous man." And Utterson could see the police inspector thinking, "Yes, and perhaps I'll be famous too if I catch the murderer." "Yes," said Utterson. "Sir Danvers was very famous." "Perhaps you will be able to help us in our search for the killer, sir," the police inspector said. He told Utterson what the girl saw. Mr. Utterson was worried when he heard the name of Hyde. Then he saw the broken stick, and he knew it immediately. "I gave it to Henry Jekyll personally, many years ago," he thought. But he said nothing. The police inspector was waiting for Mr. Utterson to say something, so the lawyer asked, "Is this Mr. Hyde a small man?" "Yes," said the police inspector. "Very small and very evil-looking, the servant girl says." Mr. Utterson thought for a moment. Then he said, "Come with me. I think that I can take you to his house." The taxi moved slowly through the streets with Mr. Utterson and the police inspector in the back. The address on Hyde's card was not a pleasant part of Soho. The street was narrow and dirty. Between the houses, there was a cheap French eating house and some small shops. Poor children in dirty clothes sat in doorways. The taxi stopped outside Hyde's house, and Utterson and the police inspector got out. Mr. Utterson knocked on the door. An old woman opened it. She had silver-coloured hair and an unpleasant face, but she spoke politely and answered Mr. Utterson's question.
"Yes," she said. "This is Mr. Hyde's house, but Mr. Hyde is not at home."
And in answer to more questions from Mr. Utterson, she said,
"Yes, Mr. Hyde came in very late last night. That's not unusual. He comes and goes at all sorts of times, and he is often away."
"When did you last see him before last night?" asked Utterson.
"More than 2 months ago," said the woman. "He went out one day, and I didn't see him again."
"We want to see his rooms," said Utterson.
"That's impossible,"
the woman began. Utterson stopped her. "This person is Police Inspector Newcombe," he said. An unpleasant smile came to the woman's face.
"Ah," she said. "Mr. Hyde is in trouble. What did he do?"
The inspector did not answer. "Just show us his rooms," he said. The rooms had good furniture and some good pictures on the wall, but there were signs that the place was left in a hurry. There were clothes lying on the floor, but with nothing in the pockets. There were a lot of burned papers in the fireplace. From some of the half-burned papers, the inspector pulled out part of a cheque-book. Then he found the other end of the broken stick behind the door. "Now we've got him," the police inspector said to Mr. Utterson. "We must just wait for him at the bank. He can't do anything without money." But it was not as easy as that. Police watched the bank, but Mr. Hyde did not go near it. It wasn't possible to get a good description of the man, and there were no photographs of him. People gave very different descriptions of him, but they all agreed about one thing. He looked wild and evil, and there was something terrible about him. Chapter 7. The Letter. It was late in the afternoon when Mr. Utterson went to Dr. Jekyll's house. Poole opened the door to him, and the lawyer and the servant crossed the courtyard behind the house and went into the workroom. The workroom was for Dr. Jekyll's scientific experiments. Above it, there was a large room where the doctor had his desk, hundreds of books, and things for his experiments. On one wall of this room was a large mirror. There was a fire in the fireplace. Near it, Dr. Jekyll was sitting silently. He looked very ill. After Poole left them, Mr. Utterson said, "Have you heard the news?" "Yes, I have heard," the doctor said. His face was white. "The newspaper boys were shouting it outside in the streets. I heard them from my dining room." "Then tell me one thing, Jekyll," said the lawyer. "Sir Danvers Carew was my client, but you are too. I want to know what I am doing. You aren't mad enough to hide this man Hyde, are you?" "No, Utterson," said the doctor. "I promise that I will never see him again. It is all finished. I'll never have any more business with him. He is safe, and nobody will ever hear of him again." The lawyer was very worried about his friend. Dr. Jekyll seemed very ill. "You seem very sure, Henry," Utterson said. "I hope that you are right. Please understand, if they catch the man, people will talk about you too." "I am sure," Jekyll answered. "I have a good reason to be sure, but I cannot explain it. But you can help me with one thing. I had a letter. I'm not sure that I should show it to the police. You can decide, Utterson. I know I can trust you." "You are afraid that it will help the police," said Mr. Utterson. "Is that right?" "No," said the doctor. "I'm not worried about Hyde or what happens to him. I have finished with him, completely finished. I was thinking of my good name." "Show me the letter," said the lawyer. The letter was written in unusual handwriting. "Dear Dr. Jekyll, you have helped me in 1,000 ways. I am afraid that I have paid you for your kindness with some very bad actions. But you do not need to worry about me. I will be safe because I have a sure way to escape. Please forgive and forget me, Edward Hyde." Mr. Utterson liked the letter. It showed that he could worry a little less. "Do you have the envelope?" he asked. "I burned it without thinking," Jekyll answered. "But the letter was not posted. I know that. Somebody brought it to the house." Mr. Utterson thought for a minute. Then he said, "If you agree, I'll keep the letter until tomorrow. I'll think about it." "Please do that," said Jekyll. "And now, I have one more question," said Mr. Utterson. "Was it Hyde who wanted you to put that sentence in your will, the sentence about your disappearance?" "Yes," said the doctor quietly. "I knew it," said Utterson. "He wanted to murder you. You have had a lucky escape." "I have had something much more important," the doctor said seriously. "I have had a lesson. Oh, Utterson, I have learned a lesson." On his way out, the lawyer stopped and spoke to Poole. "Somebody brought a letter for the doctor this morning, Poole," he said. "Can you describe the person who brought it to the door?" "No letters came today," the old servant said. "Only a few that the postman brought. All bills." Mr. Utterson's fears were as great as before when he walked home. "It seems that the letter came through the workroom door," he thought. "Or perhaps it was written in the workroom. If that is true, I must be very careful." The newspaper boys were shouting in the streets of the city. "Read all about it! Sir Danvers Carew murdered! Read all about it!" A few hours later, Mr. Utterson was sitting by the fire in his own office. With him was his head clerk, Mr. Guest. Utterson trusted his clerk. Guest often went to Dr. Jekyll's house on business for Mr. Utterson, and he knew Poole. "Perhaps he also knows about Mr. Hyde's visits to the house," thought Utterson. Mr. Utterson decided to show Guest the letter which explained some of the mystery. There was another good reason for showing Guest the letter. Guest was very clever about handwriting. "This is terrible news about Sir Danvers Carew," Mr. Utterson said.
"Yes, sir. Terrible," said Guest. "The murderer was mad, of course."
"I'd like to hear what you think about that," the lawyer said. "I have a letter here in his handwriting. Will you look at it?" Guest looked surprised, but said nothing. "Perhaps you are interested to see a murderer's handwriting," Mr. Utterson continued. "I am not sure what to do about the letter. It must be a secret between the two of us. But I would like to hear your opinion about the handwriting." Guest studied the letter with great interest.
"No, sir," he said at last. "Not mad, but it is very strange handwriting."
Just then, a servant came in with a note for Mr. Utterson.
"Is that from Dr. Jekyll, sir?" the clerk asked.
"Yes," said Utterson.
"I thought that I knew the writing," said Guest. "Is it private, Mr. Utterson?"
"No, it is only a dinner invitation," said Utterson. "Why? Do you want to see it?"
"Just for a minute, sir, please."
And the clerk put the two pieces of paper side by side and studied them with great interest.
"Thank you, sir,"
he said at last, and he gave both the notes back to Mr. Utterson. There was a minute of silence. Then the lawyer asked the question that Guest was waiting for. Mr. Utterson was afraid that he already knew the answer. "Why did you look at the two together, Guest?" asked Utterson.
"Well, sir, in very many ways the handwriting is the same," said Guest.
"That's strange," said Utterson.
"Yes," Guest agreed. "Very strange."
"But it isn't information to tell other people," said the lawyer carefully.
"No, sir," said the clerk. "I understand."
And he turned and left the room. When Mr. Utterson was alone, he locked the note in his safe. "I don't understand it," he thought. "Henry Jekyll wrote a letter for a murderer." And the blood ran cold through his body. Chapter 8. Dr. Lanyon. Time passed. Thousands of pounds were offered for information about Sir Danvers Carew's murderer. Where was Mr. Hyde? Nobody knew. The police heard a lot about him. They heard stories about his crimes. They heard about the hate that people felt for him. But where was he? After he left the house in Soho on that morning of the murder, nobody heard of Mr. Hyde again. Mr. Utterson slowly stopped being worried, and his friend Dr. Jekyll was enjoying a new life now without Mr. Hyde. The doctor visited his old friends again, and there were dinners, drinking, and pleasant talk, like the old days. On the 8th of January, Utterson had dinner at Jekyll's house, with a small number of other guests. Dr. Lanyon was there, and the three of them were soon talking like old friends again. It was very pleasant. Then, on the 12th of January, and again on the 14th, Utterson tried to see his friend, but without any success. Each time, Poole answered the door. "The doctor is not able to leave the house, sir," said the servant. "He will not see any visitors." On the 15th of January, Mr. Utterson tried again, with the same result. He was worried and unhappy. What was wrong with his friend? At last he went to see Dr. Lanyon. He thought that the doctor's servant looked worried, but the man took him in immediately to Lanyon. Mr. Utterson was shocked at the change in his friend. The usually healthy-looking man was pale and sick. He looked much older and thinner. The lawyer was sure that Lanyon was dying. But the look in the doctor's eyes was worse than this. It was a look of terrible fear, of something in the mind that was killing him. "You don't look well," said the lawyer. "Is it something serious, old friend?"
"I had a shock," said Dr. Lanyon.
And then he continued,
"I won't get better. I have only a few weeks to live. Life has been pleasant. I have enjoyed it. But if we know everything, we are happier to leave this life."
"Jekyll is ill too," said Utterson. "Have you seen him?" Lanyon held up a hand that was shaking with weakness or strong feelings.
"I don't want to see Dr. Jekyll again, or to hear anything about him," he said.
"That is very sad," Utterson said. Chapter 9. At the Window. One Sunday, on their usual walk, Mr. Utterson and Mr. Enfield found themselves in the narrow street where Dr. Jekyll's workroom door was. They stopped and looked at the door.
"Well, that story's finished," said Enfield. "We won't see Mr. Hyde again."
"I hope not," said Utterson. "Did I ever tell you that I once saw him, and I had the same feelings of fear and hate that you described?"
"Everybody seems to have the same feelings," Enfield replied. "But at the time of my story, I didn't know that this was a back way to Dr. Jekyll's house. It was silly of me."
"Well, let's step into the courtyard and look at the windows," said Utterson. "I am worried about poor Jekyll. Even if we can't go in, he will be able to hear a friend's voice."
"That's true," said Enfield.
The sun was high in the sky, but it was cold in the courtyard and a little dark. The middle one of the 3 windows was half open. Utterson saw Jekyll sitting close to it. He looked very sad, like an unhappy prisoner. "Hello," called Utterson. "Hello, Jekyll. I hope that you are feeling better."
"I am not well, Utterson," the doctor answered weakly. "I am very ill."
"You stay inside too much," the lawyer said. "You should be outside, walking like Enfield and me. Get your hat and come for a quick walk with us. You will feel much better." The doctor came nearer to the window.
"You are very good," he said. "It is kind of you to ask me. I would like that very much. But no, it is not possible. I can't go with you."
"Are you sure?" said Utterson.
"I am sure," replied the doctor. "But I am very glad to see you, Utterson. I would like to ask you and Mr. Enfield to come up, but the place is not tidy."
"Then we can stay down here," Utterson said, "and talk to you."
Dr. Jekyll smiled. "That is a kind suggestion," he said.
But suddenly the smile disappeared from his face, and a look of terrible fear took its place. The 2 men below felt their blood freeze. They saw it only for a second or two, because Jekyll shut the window immediately. But it was enough. They both turned silently and left the courtyard. When they reached a busy street again, Mr. Utterson at last looked at his friend. Both of their faces were pale, and there was a shocked look in their eyes. "God forgive us," said Mr. Utterson. The 2 men walked again in silence. "Can I do anything to help?" We have been 3 very good friends, Lanyon. We are too old to make new friends now."
"No," said Lanyon. "You can't do anything, Utterson. Ask Jekyll."
"He won't see me," said the lawyer. "I've tried. He won't give me permission to go into his house."
"I'm not surprised," was the reply. "One day soon, Utterson, after I am dead, you will perhaps learn the true story."
"Can't you tell me now?" asked Utterson.
"No, I can't tell you," said Lanyon. "Now, if you can talk to me about other things, that will be good. But if you can't keep away from that subject, please go."
After he got home, Utterson sat down and wrote a letter to Jekyll. He wrote, "I am sorry that you will not see me, and what happened between you and Lanyon." An answer came the next day. It was a long and strange reply. Towards the end, Utterson read, "I agree with Lanyon. We must never meet again. I cannot tell you the reason. In future, I am going to see very few people. My door is shut to you, but you must be sure that I am still your friend. I have brought to myself a danger that I cannot tell you about. My suffering and fears are worse than I can describe. There is only one thing that you can do to help me, Utterson. Leave me alone. Henry Jekyll." Mr. Utterson could not understand the sudden change. Until a week ago, the doctor seemed happy with life again. What went wrong? Was Jekyll mad? The lawyer remembered Lanyon's words. He knew that there was no simple reason. A week later, Dr. Lanyon was in bed, and 2 weeks after that, he died. Mr. Utterson was very sad about the death of his old friend as he sat down in Lanyon's office. He opened an envelope. On it were the words, "Private, for the eyes of J.G. Utterson only." That was in Dr. Lanyon's handwriting. Inside the envelope, there was another envelope. On it were more words in Dr. Lanyon's writing. "Do not open until Dr. Henry Jekyll dies or disappears." Mr. Utterson could not believe his eyes. Here was the word again, disappears. Here again, like in Jekyll's will, was the idea that the doctor could disappear. The idea came from the evil man Hyde, but here it was in Dr. Lanyon's handwriting. Utterson wanted to open the envelope and read, but he was a good and honest lawyer. He locked it in the back of his safe, unopened. He went quite often to Dr. Jekyll's house, but he did not see the doctor. Poole came to the door, but had no good news for him.
"The doctor spends nearly all his time in the room above the workroom," said Poole. "Sometimes he even sleeps there. He is strangely silent, Mr. Utterson, and his servants are all worried about him."
"Thank you for telling me, Poole," said Mr. Utterson.